Throughout history, humanity has had to face enigmas that defy all logic, events that seem to open cracks in the fabric of reality and force us to look into an abyss where certainties are nowhere to be found. Few enigmas are as disturbing as mysterious disappearances. People who vanished without a trace, entire towns that disappeared overnight, ships that were found empty at sea. Each of these stories carries the weight of confusion and the pain of those who wonder what happened to their loved ones. They are also stories that carry a magnetism that's hard to ignore. It is in these impossible absences where the human mind begins to weave theories, from rational explanations to supernatural hypotheses that are passed down from generation to generation. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This iceberg of disappearances invites us to descend through its layers, from the most famous cases to the darkest and most disturbing. This is not just a historical review, but a journey into the most chilling zone of our collective experience. There, where the truth hides among myths, fragmented testimonies, and inconclusive evidence, welcome to the iceberg of mysterious disappearances. On the top layer of this iceberg, we decided to place a particularly unique story. In this story, the missing person was eventually found, although many years later. However, the location of their corpse only served to multiply the mysteries more and more. Why? To help you understand, let's go back to the early morning of August 9th, 2013. On the night of the previous Thursday and the early hours of that Friday, Brandon Lawson, a 26-year-old young man from San Angelo, had a heated argument with his partner. They were raising 4 children together, and LaSpisa, Brandon's wife, was particularly angry with him since she believed he had relapsed into addictions that made him violent and problematic. Tired of being judged and pretty much out of control, Brandon got into his vehicle, shouting that he wasn't a child to be watched over. Then he drove off, not knowing that this would be the turning point for him, for a case that would shake the United States. Brandon's plan was supposed to be to drive to his father's house in Crowley, about 3 hours away. But something happened and those plans stayed unfinished. On the way, around 1 in the morning, something happened to the young man's Ford 150 truck, so he had to pull over to the side of Highway 277. Near Bronte, a small town in Coke County. From that point on, the timeline of events becomes puzzling. Brandon made a series of phone calls that are now a central piece of the mystery. First, he tried to contact his brother Kyle, asking him for help. Then, in a confused and agitated tone, he called 911. The recording of that call became the most disturbing element of the case. In the audio, Brandon seems to speak hurriedly, with broken sentences that are difficult to understand. You can hear him mention that he's in the middle of a field and that someone was chasing him. What happened? What? He was also clear that he needed the police and described what seemed to be a serious emergency. The operator, confused by his tone and unclear words, tried to get more information, but the call was cut off. When Kyle and his wife arrived at the scene shortly after, they found Brandon's truck abandoned, with the keys still inside and the gas tank empty. There were no signs of a struggle, no traces of blood, nor any obvious indication that he had been the victim of an accident. Brandon simply wasn't there. But that's not all. After taking a look around the area, assuming his brother might be lost, Kyle went back to where the truck was, this time accompanied by officers. That's when the strangest thing happened. Kyle called Brandon and told him he was next to his Ford 150, to which Brandon said he could also see the truck. How could it be that if they were both in the same place, they couldn't see each other? Kyle ended up assuming that Brandon was under the influence of illegal substances and tried to avoid the authorities, so he persuaded everyone to leave the place. However, when he came back in the morning and saw that the vehicle hadn't moved, he was overcome by a bad feeling. During that day and the next few days, police, family, and volunteers searched intensively for Brandon. They searched the open fields, bushes, dirt roads, and areas near the Colorado River. They found absolutely nothing. For years, the case remained a mystery, fueling theories that ranged from the possibility that Brandon had been the victim of a crime to the idea that he ventured into the rough terrain and succumbed to nature. Everything took an unexpected turn in 2022 when new findings were announced. Human remains found in an area near the place of the disappearance were subjected to DNA analysis. In 2023, authorities confirmed they belonged to Lawson. Yes, his body had remained there, hidden among the undergrowth, for almost a decade. Although the discovery of the remains gave the family some closure, the essential question remains unanswered. How could it be that no one had seen him before? But what caused Brandon to make that confusing 911 call? What did his broken words mean? What or who did he say he was running from? Of course, there were those who suggested that for almost 10 years, Brandon had been trapped in some kind of alternate dimension, as if a portal had opened, swallowed him, and then expelled his remains after a long digestion. What other explanations can you think of for this case? While you think and maybe comment, I invite you to go one level deeper into this iceberg. On August 30, 2013, just a few weeks after the case of Brandon Lawson, another young man would disappear under equally mysterious circumstances, although in a completely different setting. His name was Bryce LaSpisa. He was 19 years old and an art student at Sierra College in Rocklin, California. He was an outgoing guy, talented in graphic design, cheerful, and always surrounded by friends. For everyone who knew him, there were no clear signs that something dark was brewing. The last time he was seen, Bryce was driving his Toyota Highlander on Interstate 5 heading to Southern California, where his parents lived. What started as a seemingly normal trip ended up turning into a series of increasingly puzzling events. Hours before he disappeared, Bryce had been acting strangely. His girlfriend, Kim Sly, said that he had seemed distant and when saying goodbye, suddenly handed her a couple of his personal belongings, as if he were anticipating a final departure. Additionally, close friends mentioned that during those days he had been taking Adderall, a medication for attention deficit that he wasn't prescribed, and that he was also drinking alcohol excessively. During the night of August 29, instead of heading directly south, Bryce began to drive around aimlessly. He called his mother Karen, assuring her everything was fine, though his tone suggested something was wrong. There was even a moment when a mechanic at the service area assisted him because Bryce seemed disoriented, sitting inside his vehicle for hours without moving. The morning passed and he remained as if trapped in limbo, unable to decide his next move. Finally, at dawn on August 30th, his last known movement was recorded. The Toyota Highlander SUV was found overturned near the Castaic Lake Reservoir, about 145 kilometers from his parents' house. The vehicle was in a position that suggested it had deliberately gone down a steep path, hitting a concrete barrier before overturning. There was no trace of Bryce inside the car. His wallet, his laptop, and his cell phone were still inside. Everything except him. The searches began immediately. Helicopters, dogs, trackers, and divers searched the reservoir and nearby areas. They found no traces, no footprints, no remains, no personal belongings except for those left in the car. The most disturbing thing was that, despite the intense operations that were carried out and prolonged for days, Bryce seemed to have vanished into thin air. The theories quickly began to multiply. Some believe that the accident was an attempt by the boy to take his own life, a decision that didn't turn out as he expected. They suggest that Bryce may have become disoriented after the crash and wandered into the nearby hills, getting lost until he perished without being found. A more troubling theory is that someone intercepted him after the accident and his disappearance was involuntary. Finally, there are also those who believe that the young man was not in the vehicle when it crashed. It would all be a kind of setup so that everyone would believe he had died. For those who believe this, Bryce was just trying to start his life over somewhere else on the map, with a new identity. To this day, more than a decade later, the whereabouts of Bryce LaSpisa remain a mystery. His parents continue searching for him, holding on to the hope that somewhere, somehow, their son is still alive. his disappearance left an even more distressing void. Because just like in the case of Brandon Lawson, there were signs, warnings that something strange was happening, but no one managed to understand them in time. Could it all have been avoided? It's too late to know that, but it's not too late to continue. Are you ready? Well, because we're going to dive one level deeper into this iceberg, where confusion mixes with images that seem straight out of a nightmare. The case of Lars Mittang is one of those cases that chills your blood, because unlike others, this one was caught on video. Lars Mittangs. These security cameras are from Varna Airport in Bulgaria. The young man pacing is named Lars Mittang. During the time the 28-year-old spent there, he caught the attention of several people. The reasons? At times he seemed disoriented and confused. The truth is that many others didn't find that particularly strange. It's reasonable for someone to feel that way at an airport. Sometimes the stress or adrenaline of a trip, especially if we're in a country that's not our own, can work against us. However, Lars's case would be a bit more serious. Lars was born in Berlin on February 9, 1986, and he had a very special bond with his mother. His father had suffered a severe stroke, and his mother had relied on him to keep up with the household routine. The situation had been painful, as you can imagine, but both of them had managed to move forward through love and perseverance. Lars also loved soccer and spent much time with friends. Both factors were what, in some way, would end up shaping his tragic fate. In 2014, the young man organized a trip with some of the friends he used to get together with to watch games. After a brief discussion, they decided that the destination would be the Golden Sands Resort, located in the aforementioned Bulgaria. The preparations were filled with excitement, and by the time June 30th arrived, everyone boarded the plane with high expectations. Expectations that were not disappointed at all when they arrived at the Black Sea coast. The landscapes were breathtaking, the accommodations were luxurious, and the adventure seemed to have all the ingredients to become nothing short of unforgettable. It would be, though, for the most unexpected reasons. Everything was fun, outings and pleasant conversations, until about a week after we arrived. On July 5th, Lars went with two of his friends to a bar located on the beach. It was a place that prided itself on having good drinks and good music, and there was no shortage of either, but there was something else. One television was showing the 2014 Fédération Internationale de Football Association World Cup quarterfinals. As we already mentioned, Lars and those who were with him were big fans of that sport, so they sat as close to the screen as they could. With clear intentions of enjoying the match, even though the game was between the Netherlands and Costa Rica, suddenly Lars ended up arguing with another young man who was also there. Neither of them had any particular affinity for either team, but the argument escalated within seconds. Before things got irreversibly heated, Lars preferred to stay silent, showing off his rather peaceful personality. So, the matter remained just a simple anecdote. When they were heading back to the hotel, the group of friends stopped at a McDonald's to get something to eat. Lars decided to wait for them outside, claiming he wasn't hungry. The other two left the Golden Arches establishment a few minutes later and were surprised. Lars was no longer there. After considering the possibilities, they continued on to the hotel, assuming that maybe, due to some urgency, he had gone ahead of them. However, Lars wasn't there, and he would arrive at his room a few hours later. By then, his friends, who were very worried, asked him what had happened. Astonished, they listened as the young man told them that he had felt an overwhelming need to go back to the bar to make things right with the person he had argued with. Did he seem angry? To this, which was already strange, he added another detail, even more curious. Lars said that when he arrived at the place, he found 4 Russian men who, hired by his opponent, had attacked him mercilessly. He had touched his ear in pain. Supposedly a punch had hit him in that area and he wasn't feeling well at all. Why had Lars, always so supportive and prone to diffusing violent actions, acted so impulsively? They weren't sure, but they knew they had to take him to a hospital, so they did. The doctor didn't have to run many tests to make his diagnosis. Indeed, Lars had a ruptured eardrum. The main issue was that, given the circumstances, it wasn't a good idea for him to fly due to the pressure involved. The friends already had return tickets, but they quickly suggested cancelling them and making the trip back by bus. Lars laughed and asked them not to worry, that he would return on his own, that they didn't have to change their plans. In fact, he would take the opportunity to stay a couple more days. The others agreed and said goodbye to him. They would never see him again. The first thing Lars did when he was alone was to go to another specialist, who repeated the diagnosis and prescribed him a broad-spectrum antibiotic called cefuroxime 500 as a preventive measure. This antibiotic would reduce the inflammation, prevent infections, and thanks to it, he would be able to fly without any problems and then have surgery in his own country. With everything under control, the young man bought the medication and found a cheap place near the airport to stay before resuming his return the next day. No, it's unclear what happened at the Color Hotel, where he stayed overnight, but the next day, Lars was changed. No. Reports say the young man spent the night wandering the hotel lobby, then mysteriously left for an hour early in the morning. Why did he go out? It's still a mystery. When dawn broke, he took a taxi that he stopped by waving his arms desperately. Already at the airport, he could be seen with clear signs of paranoia. At one point, he called his mother and asked her to cancel his credit cards, since he believed someone wanted to rob him. He hung up before the other person could respond. Later, he would send her a message that read, "What is cefuroxime 500? Was Lars suspicious of the drug he had been given? What is cefuroxime 500? From July 2014, the young man had lost all self-control. Around 9:30, he was seen entering the airport medical office, where he was attended to. A doctor who confirmed the ear injury, but saw him fit to board a plane. Lars appeared nervous, called his mother one last time, and assured her that they didn't want to let him go. Then, for no apparent reason, probably scared by a man who was working there, he murmured, "I don't want to die here." Immediately afterward, he ran out, leaving all his luggage behind. As could be seen on the terminal's cameras, Lars ran past the check-in and baggage counters. Barely slowing down, he crossed the parking lot and then continued his marathon, even beyond the fence of the place. How did he jump over the more than 2-meter-high containment barrier, which was topped with barbed wire? Everyone assumes he was able to do it, because he was in an altered state. He was searched for days with drones and dogs trained to detect cadavers. To this day, Lars is still missing. He had no history of mental problems or drug use, and it couldn't be confirmed that the medication he was taking had any side effects that could explain his actions. The conclusion? It's a total mystery. Was someone really following him, or had the young man fallen into an unpredictable spiral of madness? We don't know, just like we don't know what happened to Asha, a 9-year-old girl who is on the next level of this iceberg. On February 14th, 2000, while most people celebrated Valentine's Day, a family in Shelby, North Carolina, began to live a nightmare that remains unresolved to this day. I should agree, a girl just 9 years old disappeared under circumstances that seemed to defy all logic. The previous night had been apparently normal. Aja and her brother O'Brien went to bed early after returning from church and doing their homework. Around midnight, her parents made sure that they were okay and that the girl was safe, that they were together so that they would be together. However, something happened in the early hours of the morning. The investigation found that around 2:30 a.m., O'Brien heard noises and saw Aya getting out of bed. He assumed she was in the bathroom and fell back asleep. But what the girl actually did was leave the house in complete darkness and during a heavy storm. She wore light clothes, not fit for the freezing rain that morning. At that hour, several drivers traveling on Highway 18 claimed to have seen a little girl walking alone by the side of the road. Some even turned around to try to help her. But when they tried to approach Aya, she ran into the woods and disappeared among the trees. Was that the last time anyone saw her alive? News of her disappearance triggered an immediate search. Volunteers, dogs, trackers, and helicopters searched the area but found nothing. What's unsettling is there were no signs she ran away due to mistreatment or that anyone waited for her. They just left. She left home for no apparent reason, as if something invisible had compelled her to leave. A year later, in August 2001, the first concrete clue appeared. A backpack belonging to Aya was found buried in a plastic bag about 50 kilometers from her home. Inside, there were personal belongings and school books. No one could explain how it got there or why it was buried that way. As time went by, the case only became more mysterious. The FBI joined the investigation, which is still open. Many theories have surfaced, from the idea that Aya might have run away of her own free will, to the possibility that someone tricked her into leaving home and then kidnapped her. However, none of the hypotheses have conclusive evidence. Aya's parents, who to this day keep her memory alive with vigils and public campaigns, face each February 14th with an anniversary marked by pain and uncertainty. The contrast is brutal. While others celebrate love, they remember the night their daughter walked alone into the darkness and never returned. In November 2020, an inmate named Marcus Mellon, who had been convicted of sexual offenses against minors. 6 years earlier, he wrote a letter to the Shelby Star claiming that Degree had been murdered and that he knew where to find her. 2 months later, Cleveland County Sheriff Alan Norman announced that Mellon's claims had led to another dead end. In the case report, it was revealed that he was murdered. Revealed in the police report, the report stated that he was murdered by his mother, who was a police officer. Murdered by the police, it was revealed by the police. The case was that he was murdered by his mother, as revealed in the police report. From here on, we leave the surface and things start to get murkier and murkier. On January 2nd, 2000 in Nashville, North Carolina, an 18-year-old named Seth Quinn left his job at Walmart planning to meet a friend to look at a car he wanted to buy. He never came home. What at first seemed like a routine plan turned into one of the most puzzling and strange disappearance cases of the last few decades. That afternoon, he met with a coworker, Robert Jason Owens, who was going to take him to look at a Mitsubishi Eclipse that Seth was interested in buying. Both of them headed out onto the road, but at some point during the trip, something unexpected happened. According to Owens, Seth received a message on his pager and got nervous when he read it. He stopped the car and told him that he had to leave immediately. He left in a hurry and was never seen alive again. The most disturbing part happened after. 2 days later, on January 4th, he missed work. Instead, a relative received a phone call in his name, falsely stating that he was sick. The voice on the other end of the line wasn't Seth's, but Jason Owens's. When the authorities questioned him, Owens claimed that he had been asked to make that call as a favor, but his story was not very believable. On January 16th, 2 weeks after the disappearance, the investigation took a disturbing turn. Seth's car was found abandoned in the parking lot of a local hospital. Inside, there were a number of items that seemed to come from a scene carefully staged to create confusion. A live puppy, an empty soda bottle, and a jacket that didn't belong to Seth. Additionally, painted on the rear window of the car was a symbol of red lips, as if someone wanted to leave a symbolic or mocking message. The scene, far from clarifying what happened, deepened the mystery. Why was the car there? Who had left those objects inside it? And what did those painted lips on the window mean? No logical explanation managed to fit all the elements together. For years, the case remained stalled, fueling all kinds of theories. Some pointed to Jason Owens as the main suspect, given his closeness and his multiple contradictions in his testimony. Others talked about the possibility that the disappearance was related to a young woman whom Seth was interested in starting a relationship with, which could have generated tensions with people close to her. Time passed, but the truth began to emerge in fragments. In 2017, almost 2 decades after the disappearance, Jason Owens was formally charged with murder in connection with the case, following new evidence that directly linked him to the crime. Owens was already serving time for killing another couple in North Carolina. This reinforced the idea that his role in Seth's disappearance wasn't a coincidence. On July 25, 2022, more than 22 years after Quinn's disappearance, Owens pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of being an accessory to first-degree murder. Owens stated that his uncle had been hired to kill Quinn by the boyfriend of a woman Quinn had been romantically interested in, and that he had helped his uncle cover up the murder. Owens's uncle, who died in 2017, could not be questioned to corroborate the story. As you can imagine, The lack of solid evidence left the whole matter unresolved, and if Owens had only confessed as an accomplice to get favors in prison, was his testimony trustworthy? Despite these formal accusations, Seth's body was never found. His parents and loved ones still don't have a place to mourn his loss, nor the absolute certainty of what happened that January night. With the case of Frederick Valentich, we go one step deeper into this iceberg, into a territory where what's unsettling is not just the disappearance, but the enigmatic background that connects it with the unknown. On the afternoon of October 21, 1978, Frederick Valentich, a 20-year-old Australian pilot, got into his Cessna 182L plane to carry out a training flight. The plan was simple: take off from Moorabbin in Victoria and head toward King Island, flying over the Bass Strait. A trip that should have taken under 2 hours. But that flight never ended. What sets this case apart from others is that the disappearance was accompanied by real-time communication. While he was flying over the strait, Valentich contacted Melbourne Air Traffic Control to report something extraordinary. He said that a flying object was following him. In the official recording of that communication, which has been released and analyzed to this day, you can hear Valentich's voice describing what he sees. Green lights moving at high speed. A metallic object that seems to orbit over his plane, and aerial behavior impossible for any known aircraft. The final minutes of the conversation are chilling. Valentich states that the object is not a plane and that it is now surrounding him. He says that his engine is starting to fail. Then suddenly, a strange metallic sound is heard, a buzzing that lasts several seconds, and the transmission cuts off. Frederick Valentich was never contacted again. Search operations began immediately. Planes, ships, and helicopters searched Bass Strait for days. They found no remains of the plane, no signs of an accident, and no debris floating in the water. It was like both the pilot and his plane vanished, wiped off the map. The case quickly became a hotbed of theories. Some skeptics think Valentich either got disoriented and crashed into the sea or faked his disappearance to escape and start a new life somewhere else. However, none of these hypotheses quite fit. No remains or evidence were ever found to support such explanations. On the other hand, those who believe in unexplained aerial phenomena point out that what Valentich reported matches multiple testimonies of unidentified flying object sightings in Australia during that time, particularly in the region of the Bass Strait. The recording of his communication is, for them, the most compelling evidence that he came face to face with something that did not belong to conventional aviation. And at this point in the story, it's necessary to emphasize one detail. According to his father, Guido Valentich was a fervent believer in UFOs and had been worried about being attacked by them. 6 days before he disappeared, Valentich argued with his girlfriend Rhonda Rushton about the possibility of being taken by a flying saucer. This led many to wonder if the man had paranoid delusions or a premonition of what would happen to him. Did he have any proof that beings from another planet would come for him? For the officials of the Western Australia Department of Transport, Valentich became disoriented and saw his own lights reflected in the water. They intended to close the case. Decades later, in 2014, metal fragments appeared on a beach at Cape Otway, which were analyzed by the authorities. Although it couldn't be confirmed 100% that they belonged to the man's plane. Some experts considered this a highly probable possibility. Meanwhile, the disappearance of Frederick Valentich remains one of the greatest mysteries in the history of aviation and ufology. For our next level, we'll explore one of naval history's most iconic cases, the mystery of the Mary Celeste. A mystery that not only shocked the world in the 19th century, but also became a universal symbol of unexplained disappearances at sea. December 4th, 1872. The British ship Dei Gratia was sailing through the North Atlantic, about 400 miles from the Azores, when its crew spotted a brig that seemed to be drifting. It was the Mary Celeste, an American merchant vessel that had left New York days earlier bound for Genoa, Italy. The discovery seemed routine at first, but what the sailors found when they boarded it became one of the most disturbing and famous stories in maritime history. The Mary Celeste was in perfect condition to sail. Its sails were set, although somewhat damaged, and the hull was in optimal condition. In the hold, the cargo of industrial alcohol remained almost untouched. The food and supplies were complete, enough to feed the crew for several months. There were no signs of struggle, blood, or violence. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their young daughter Sophia, and the 7 sailors who made up the crew had disappeared without a trace. The strangest thing was that all their personal belongings were still on board: clothes, documents, even the little girl's toys. The only thing missing was the lifeboat. The logbook was found in order, with normal entries. Until November 25th, just 9 days before the ship was found, there were no signs of serious problems. Everything seemed to be going normally. For years, the Mary Celeste mystery has inspired many theories. One of the most accepted theories suggests that Captain Briggs, fearing an explosion from the alcohol fumes stored in the hold, ordered the crew to temporarily abandon the ship. However, this explanation is not entirely convincing. Why would an experienced captain abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship in the middle of the Atlantic? Other hypotheses range from mutinies or pirate attacks to supernatural phenomena. At the end of the 19th century, sensationalist newspapers even linked the case to sea monsters or even extraterrestrial abductions. The Mary Celeste was actually brought to port by the Dei Gratia crew, and after official investigations, it was never possible to determine what happened to the people who were on board. The ship continued sailing for years, but it always carried that reputation of being a cursed vessel. One of its new captains deliberately wrecked it near the coast of Haiti in 1885 in an attempt to defraud the insurance company. As an interesting fact, the story of the Mary Celeste would not have resonated so deeply in popular culture if it weren't for the fact that Arthur Conan Doyle, who would later create Sherlock Holmes, wrote about the case in a newspaper of the time. However, his account was full of exaggerations and entirely fabricated passages, in order to create a more appealing story that would quickly stick in the minds of those who read it. It's likely that much of what we know today about the Mary Celeste isn't accurate, and it's all because of the author of many of the best detective books. More than a century and a half later, the case remains one of the greatest maritime mysteries of all time. And while we're interested in continuing to dig into the Mary Celeste case, we're going to leave it behind to dive one level deeper into this iceberg where things get really dark. Now we're going to look at a case where not just one crew disappeared, but 2. In 1845, 2 ships left England on a mission that seemed monumental but possible: to find the long-sought Northwest Passage, that sea route connecting the Atlantic with the Pacific through the icy waters of the Canadian Arctic. The expedition was led by the experienced captain Sir John Franklin, a Royal Navy officer with decades of service and a reputation as a respected explorer. The ships, Her Majesty's ship Erebus and Her Majesty's ship Terror, were the best that Victorian technology could offer. Reinforced with iron to face the ice, equipped with adapted steam engines, and with enough provisions for several years. Everything indicated that the mission had a great chance of success. It marked the start of one of the most unsettling disappearances in the history of exploration. The 2 ships were last seen in Baffling Bay in July of 1845. From that point on, all contact was lost. The Royal Navy was expecting news, but months went by and no reports arrived. What at first could be interpreted as a normal delay soon turned into alarm. The expedition vanished in the Arctic, one of the planet's most inhospitable regions. Over time, rescue expeditions began. Ships were sent in different directions, exploring islands and frozen channels. What was found was not the triumph of exploration, but a fragmented tale of desperation. Testimonies from Inuit communities spoke of ships trapped in the ice, of starving men wandering in ever smaller groups, of bodies that fell one by one in the endless whiteness. On King William Island, remains were found that confirmed the worst. The ships had become trapped in the ice in 1846, and the crew, unable to free them, was stranded in the middle of a desolate wasteland. Documents found in a tin describe that Franklin died in 1847 and that the remaining men, weakened by scurvy, tuberculosis, and lead poisoning from the canned provisions, attempted a desperate march south. None survived. Even more disturbing were the later findings: human bones with marks that suggested acts of cannibalism, a conclusion that horrified Victorian society at the time. For many, it was unthinkable that British officers would have resorted to something so macabre, but the archaeological evidence seemed to confirm it. For more than a century, the final whereabouts of the ships remained a mystery. The Her Majesty's ship Erebus was found underwater in 2014, surprisingly well preserved. 2 years later, the Her Majesty's ship Terror was discovered in similar condition, almost as if they had been frozen in time, sealing the tragic end of the expedition in silence. Today, there are those who believe that there are still members of that crew who were never found, and that we will never be able to know for sure the details of the misfortunes those men had to face. The mystery of Franklin is not just the chronicle of a disappearance, but also a reflection of human arrogance in the face of nature. This is the risk faced by pioneers, like the protagonist of the next level of the iceberg. On July 2nd, 1937, the Pacific sky became the stage for one of the most famous disappearances of the 20th century. Amelia Earhart, a pioneer in aviation and a symbol of independence in a male-dominated era, together with her navigator Fred Noonan, was embarking on the most dangerous stage of her ambitious project to fly around the world. Their aircraft, a Lockheed Electra 10E, had taken off from Lae in Papua New Guinea, bound for the tiny Howland Island, a nearly invisible spot in the ocean's center. The stretch was crucial, over 4,000 kilometers of water without visual cues, where a miscalculation could mean the difference between landing successfully or being lost forever in the vastness. Amelia's radio transmission that day clearly reflects the growing tension. Her messages showed the difficulty in contacting the Coast Guard ship United States ship Itasca, which was guiding them. Her final words were a testament to anguish. I quote verbatim, "We are on the line, 157-337. We must be right above you, but we can't see you." Then silence. They never made it to the island. They were never seen again. The disappearance sparked one of aviation history's most intense search operations. Ships, aircraft, and explorers covered thousands of square kilometers of ocean and atolls in search of any clue. But all they found were speculations. Theories multiplied. The leading theory is that the plane ran out of fuel, crashed into the sea, and sank beyond tracking. Other researchers point to Garnard Island, now Nikomaroro, where human bones and remnants of objects were found in the 1940s that could have belonged to the aviators. A more conspiratorial hypothesis suggests that Amelia was captured by the Japanese while trying to make an emergency landing at one of their bases, becoming a secret prisoner. Whatever the truth may be, the fact is that Amelia Earhart never completed her journey. Her disappearance turned her into a legend. Her name lives on not only as an icon of feminism and aviation, but also as one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the last century. But let's let her story rest in peace and move down to the next level. Here not only does darkness reign, but the atmosphere becomes oppressive. It's time to ask a crucial question. Is it possible for an entire colony to disappear? In 1587, a group of men, women, and children left the coast of England with a bold dream to establish a permanent colony in what was then known as Virginia, a wild and barely explored territory. John White, a visionary artist who documented North America's landscapes and native peoples, led the group. The colonists landed on Roanoke Island, located off what is now the coast of North Carolina. Upon arrival, they found a lush territory, dense forests and rivers winding through the vegetation. The promise of fertile land and unrivaled opportunities filled them with hope. However, the reality of the New World soon became evident. Food was scarce, diseases and conflicts with local tribes created an atmosphere of constant tension. and the distance from England turned every decision into a matter of life or death. John White returned to England just a few days after his arrival to get more supplies and reinforcements. His necessary departure was also a sign of what was to come. The war with Spain and the shortage of ships delayed his return for 3 years, until 1590. When he was finally able to return, the colony he had left thriving was empty. The houses and wooden fences remained intact, but the inhabitants were gone. The only clue was a word carved into a tree, Croatoan. This enigmatic and brief message was interpreted in many ways. Had they moved to the nearby Croatoan island? Were they victims of an attack? That answer was lost to time, along with the colony's mystery. Since that moment, the disappearance of Roanoke has given rise to different theories. Let's analyze some of them. Some believe that the colonists may have joined local tribes, learning their customs and adopting their way of life to survive. Partial evidence suggests that certain indigenous groups showed European traits in later years, but there was never any definitive confirmation. Another hypothesis holds that the colonists may have tried to move to the mainland in search of better land, only to get lost among the vast forests and rivers. The challenging terrain and inaccurate maps caused them to vanish without a trace. Some historians speculate that clashes with hostile tribes or even with other colonists could have led to their forced disappearance. However, no evidence of a struggle or massacre has been found. The region was familiar with hurricanes, storms, and diseases unknown to Europeans. The combination of hunger, adverse weather, and diseases could have decimated the colony, scattering the survivors. Despite centuries of archaeological exploration, the Roanoke colony remains a mystery. Building remains, tool fragments, and scattered artifacts have been found, but none allow us to reconstruct the final fate of the colonists. Each discovery increases the fascination and confusion, turning Roanoke into a symbol of the ultimate historical enigma. Diaries and other sets of clues were also found, which later turned out to be false, making it clear that there were people willing to profit from the terrible event. On the other hand, the word that was found on the tree, Croatoan, became almost legendary in pop culture. Some say the same word appeared in other places where disappearances occurred, and there's even a legend that claims it was the last thing Edgar Allan Poe said before he died. What became of that colony? What were its final days like? Was it the colonists or someone else who left that enigmatic expression on the trunk of a tree? None of these questions have an answer, although we can be sure of one thing. The case of Roanoke was not the only one. Let's go one level deeper. In the vast expanses of northern Canada lies the remote Inuit settlement of Anjikuni, on the shores of a lake that bears the same name. It was a place forgotten by modernity, where life followed the rhythms of ice and hunting, where each day required effort and respect for the surrounding nature. It was the winter of 1930 when Joe Label, a Canadian fur trapper, found himself in that region as inhospitable as it was majestic. The preparation of pelts and the return to his camp. However, that routine trip was about to turn into a story that, over the years, would become almost legendary. When Abel reached the Inuit village, he was immediately halted by an unnatural silence. Abel scanned the area with growing confusion. It was as if the entire village had vanished from the face of the earth in an instant, leaving behind only the echoes of a life that had been brought to a sudden halt. The man tried to find any sign of violence, any trace of a struggle, but he found nothing. No blood, no sign of forced evacuation. It was an absolute mystery. What Abel saw reached the ears of Canadian and American newspapers, and soon the story of the ghost town of Anjikuni began to spread around the world. Journalists, investigators, and curious people tried to find explanations. Some suggested the Inuits suffered a sudden epidemic, but no records confirmed mass deaths. Others speculated about kidnappings by criminals or even unknown forces, while some delved into the supernatural. Years later, official investigations tried to verify the facts, but the documentation was scarce and contradictory. The expeditions to Lake Anjikuni found no conclusive evidence. The settlement was so remote that there were few records. Some experts think the story may have been exaggerated by sensationalist media at the time. Today, Lake Anjikuni and its region remain inhospitable and silent. The icy wind sweeps the shores, animals hunt and hide, and the vanished village remains a mystery. Still lingers over the frozen waters. And from those waters, we will leap to the very top because, ironically, the last level of this iceberg takes place in the skies. On the night of March 7, 2014 in Kuala Lumpur, the airport pulsed with the usual rhythm of a major hub. Flashing lights on the pavement, announcements in different languages, suitcases rolling along conveyor belts, and families saying goodbye with hugs and hurried gestures. Amid the bustle, 239 people boarded the Malaysia Airlines Boeing 777-200 extended range flight MH370, bound for Beijing from the city. Some were business travelers, others were tourists, students, there were even entire families. The crew, experienced and well-trained, carried out their routines with precision. Cabin checks, instrument inspections, and greetings to the passengers before takeoff. Nothing foreshadowed that this 6-hour trip would become a global mystery. The plane smoothly ascended into the night. The passengers settled into their seats. Some were sleeping, others were going over their itineraries or watching movies. The crew started their routine, serving meals, drinks, and offering friendly smiles in the flight's first minutes. From the cockpit, the pilots controlled the trajectory, while the lights of Malaysia faded below and the plane entered the cold calm of the South China Sea. Everything seemed normal until around 1:19 when contact with air traffic controllers disappeared. Radio communication was abruptly cut off and civilian radars lost the signal from MH370. Initially, it seemed like a minor temporary communication issue that aviation protocols could handle. But uncertainty grew when it was discovered that the plane had changed its route inexplicably, turning west, moving away from the planned air corridor, crossing the Malay Peninsula and heading toward the southwest of the Indian Ocean, a remote and almost inaccessible area. Meanwhile, on the surface, relatives and authorities began to realize the seriousness of the situation. The news spread quickly. In Beijing, airports and consulates tried to contact the passengers. In Kuala Lumpur, confusion and anguish grew with every minute that passed without any sign. The media, social networks, and public opinion were filled with questions. How could a modern airplane disappear without a trace? What had happened inside that cockpit? Thousands of kilometers away, the search teams were facing a monumental challenge. Searching for a lost Boeing 777 in the ocean was like looking for a needle in a vast empty field of ice. Ships and planes began to search vast areas of the open sea, equipped with sonar technology, long-range radars, and satellite communication systems. Data from Inmarsat, a satellite company, provided the last clue. The plane kept flying for hours, burning fuel, until it finally disappeared completely. Each satellite reading offered more questions than answers, a flight that seemed deliberately diverted but with irresponsible unknown motives. While rescue teams searched the waters, the story of the passengers and crew began to take on a human dimension. Each disappearance, individual, collective. There were no survivors, no bodies found in the first days, only a void that grew with each passing hour. Uncertainty became pain, and pain led to frustration for both families and investigators. As the months went by, fragments of the plane began to appear, carried by ocean currents to the coasts of Africa and various islands in the Indian Ocean. A wing, a piece of fuselage, which confirmed that the plane had crashed but did not solve the mystery of the deviation. Experts from all over the world analyzed every fragment, looking for signs of mechanical failure, sabotage, or explosion. However, no clear evidence emerged. Theories multiplied. Some suggested catastrophic failures, others pointed to a deliberate act. In the cockpit, there was speculation about hijackings, outside interference, and ongoing debates. The crew lost control of the plane without leaving any signals. It was found that 2 passengers had fake passports, 1 pilot had simulated similar route deviations, among other things. The more they investigated, the more inexplicable angles appeared. Each hypothesis was examined in detail, but the mystery remained intact. Flight MH370 became the symbol of the contemporary aviation enigma, a question that technology, science, and research still can't answer. Years after March 8, 2014, MH370 continues to float in the collective consciousness like a specter. Each new finding, each discovered fragment brings a small thread of truth enough to reconstruct the whole story. The ocean continues to keep its secret and Flight MH370 remains suspended amid tragedy, mystery, and fascination, revealing the iceberg's end. Thank you. Disappearances, whether of people, ships, or entire colonies, confront us with an uncomfortable truth. Nothing is as certain or as permanent as we believe. A young man who vanishes in a frozen forest. A plane that disappears into the vastness of the ocean. A ship found floating without a crew. An entire colony that vanishes, leaving behind only a tree with a word carved into it. Each of these events reminds us that what we consider stable, protected, and understandable can be erased in an instant. These stories show us how fragile human life is in the face of nature, time, and the unpredictability of the world. It shows us that even the best plans, safest routines, and strongest structures can vanish unexpectedly, leaving only emptiness and questions. Each of these stories confronts us with our powerlessness in the face of the vast and the unknown. And they force us to recognize that, despite all the knowledge and technology we accumulate, we do not control the land, the sea, or time. Ultimately, disappearance in its purest form is a reminder that it's a lie to believe we have answers for everything that happens around us.